Hello, Diep. Good morning. Thanks for coming on.
Good morning, Kenneth. Thank you for having me.
So I start with this question with everyone. What is your relationship to the word Vietnamese or to the idea of the Vietnamese?
Well, the relationship that I have to Vietnam and to Vietnamese is, well, I was born Vietnamese. Um, my mother, when we were really little, drilled into us the notion that we could have been born um, American, we could have been born African, we could have been born many nations, but we were born Vietnamese. And in this lifetime, then eh, make sure that you do something to be proud of that.
Is it important to you to bring that idea to your children?
Mm, well, I think that that idea to be proud of your heritage is a very fundamentally important idea, um, because especially for someone who are born Vietnamese, it's a country that uh, has suffered a lot. It's a country that is changing very rapidly, and the world is when you're thrown out there in the world, um, and you identify yourself to be many things. Um, then it is important to be to also understand and explore that part, the roots of what it is. But I think that the world today is a very globalized place, um, and that identity itself must be broadened to include other aspects of your person, especially for us as a part of the diaspora. I think that the notion must also include the the life that we live here and the friends that we have here in outside of Vietnam. So important enough for me to teach my child that he was born as a Vietnamese American.
I ask these questions because I have children, young children as well, and I am always searching for what it means for them to be Vietnamese and how important it is to for me to teach them. Do you find that you've done, I wouldn't say a good job, but do you think that you've done a decent job at sort of having them understand what it means to be Vietnamese?
Well, I don't think so. I think that as a parent, it's a continuing role, and then the child grows up. But we have only one son, um, but the child goes up to be his own and all that. But the job as a parent probably would never cease, or at least you would never see yourself um, uh, away from that identity once you have it. So I think that it's very important that we continue that thinking, but also I think that as my understanding of what being Vietnamese is all about changes over time, I also think that that understanding will require changes over time, and the relationship that you have one has with one own's children also changes over time. So yeah, I think that is always going to be changing, and whether or not I've done a good job, uh, it's really hard to say. But I think that he understands that he is Vietnamese, um, American, especially because he's born here in America.
When did you leave? How old were you?
I was 16 when I left Vietnam.
Can you tell me about the story of
Uh,
you leaving Vietnam?
Sure. I mean, I was 16, and at the time I realized that given the fact that uh, my father um, was in re-education camp. That and this was 1980, and that it would have been very difficult for me to be able to go to college at the time. So and all my life, up until that point, I thought I was going to go to college and go out and work and don't, too many things, but too many dreams, or not dreams, thoughts at the time to what to become. But certainly, to go to college is what I needed to do. And I knew that if I had stayed in Vietnam, I wouldn't have been able to go to college.
So you were
So when my mother came and asked me, and she'd asked me many times before that, over the years, this is 5 years, right, after Saigon fell. And I had always said no. And that one time I said, yes, mother, I will go. And uh, and and so that got arranged, and we left Vietnam within a week, within, yeah, less than a.
why would you say no 4 times?
Well, because I thought, and this is back to the Vietnamese part of it, I thought that, uh, I come from a family that believed uh, that we should be, that, as Vietnamese, we must do everything to be proud to be Vietnamese. And so, I have always said, okay, I will stay here and build the society where we're going to grow up and whatnot. But by 1980, it was the country was descending into a very difficult time, and the decade that ensued were very dark. And of course, in Europe, for example, 1988 saw the fall of the Berlin Wall, and and the Soviet Union, yeah, perestroika, and everything else. So Vietnam was suffering from that, and that was a very difficult time to grow up and to look around and see that not just you, but all the young people around you may not have any prospect whatsoever for many things.
And your mother asked you 4 times and you still said no, and things were dark
Yeah,
and
and then I finally said yes. And and so I left with my father and my younger brother. And we still had at the time my sister, two sisters, and one brother left behind. So we have six of us in six siblings and two parents, and we took
why why
four
did they
different.
dis why did they decide to take you and your brother?
Oh, because I was the oldest at the time. My older brother had left in 1975. So, like I said, we have six kids, two parents, so eight people, four different trips to get out of Vietnam over the course of 17 years. So our family was broken up terribly in during that 17 years.
What was it like when you left?
Mm.
What was the trip like?
Looking back, the trip is not as traumatic, could not have been as traumatic. But to me, it was a defining trip in many ways, because, I didn't understand anything about the world. For 5 years now, we were under very different circumstances, and the outlook to the world was very, very limited. So, my thinking of going out there is, okay, fine, you get on a boat, and I never thought for a moment, okay, to get on the boat, where do you go, and where do you go next, and how is it that you're going to get to America? None of that information was available to me. And I even none of those questions were even available to me. So it was a very ill-informed trip, and I think that it was very traumatic from that perspective. And So we were in a boat, and when by the time that we were leaving, I, I had to go down to the Delta. And even though I was born in Saigon, it's very clear that my accent and the way I dressed and whatnot stood out. In Cần Thơ at that time in 1980, everybody knew that people were coming down there and other places to take a river boat out to sea. Basically, we climbed onto a boat that was a river, really a river boat, and it set out to sea, and it was very traumatic for that reason, also. And so when we were leaving in the middle of the night, there were gunshots all around, and I was like, oh. But the people in the older people in the boat were very, very scared because they knew what was happening. So we actually, I remember the first few hours when we got out, because the person who was piloting, captaining the ship, maybe he didn't know much. I can't tell. He didn't know much about whatever. So we ended up being caught in a mm, uh, you know I don't know what it is, but like a sand area, and the boat was not able to float through it. It was very and I remember the woman is a slightly older woman. She's 20 years old, and so all the kids didn't have to jump down, but all the young people in thanh niên, the
Young
people,
adults, yeah.
the young adults had to jump out and push the boat outside of that. And when she climbed up, uh, and the boat was very crowded. It's all sitting only, enough people. Everybody have their own seat, not in, like around like this. And she was just in my arm for like hours afterwards, and she's like soaking wet and exhausted, and she was just like there's nowhere to lean on anybody. So I was holding her, and it was pitch dark outside, and I was holding this woman who's like completely exhausted and dripping wet because she jumped down together with other young people to try to push the boat out of that dune thing. And then we drifted on in the sea for 3 days before we were rescued by a Dutch oil boat.
And then did you go,
A Dutch oil, exploration boat. So that was a very big boat.
where did you guys go after that? Where did the boat take you?
So the boat, oh my God, that was a crazy trip, because what happened to that oil exploration boat, and I never really, had the wherewithal to look back very carefully, but that boat, next destination of port is Saigon. And so it went back into Saigon, and everybody, and we rescue another boat the next day. I think the other boat had more people than us, and maybe less. Sorry,
But
because
how
the
did that,
total number of boat people on that huge boat. It was like a huge, like oil exploration boat. It's huge, and they hit all of us in under the you know inside, and they docked for a few days in Saigon. When I wrote the letter to my mother, and somebody posted those letters, and my mother almost died, she said, when she saw the that it was postmarked in Saigon. And so it was quite dramatic, but I think that there was a courage, a decision by the whole the captain and all of those people who rescue us.
that's a very courageous thing that the boat captain did to just hide everybody.
Yes,
Um,
yes. That's why I always think that it's crazy that we don't see the courage in that we don't have the courage to support the people who try to escape now.
We haven't gotten into your
Sorry.
work. No, no, I please feel free to
Yeah,
take
no,
your time.
I think it's just the whole thing about being a boat person is those moments, and
Right.
it's really hard to digest it and compile it or piece it together or even write about it or anything like that, because hindsight, especially since it's so long ago, was very it would never be what it was, um, in any case. So I think that there was a lot of courage, and you just didn't understand it. And then the next destination port for that both the itinerary was Singapore, and that's when we went into the refugee camp in Singapore. And I was there for 2 months, 2.5 months, and then because my brother was in the US at the time already, because he left in 1975 as a 13-year-old child. And he's only a year and a half older than me. And he was interviewing um, for Princeton. He was accepted to Princeton, and well, he was accepted to several Ivy League schools at the time, and he decided to choose Princeton. And the church of the person who interviewed him, ended up sponsoring us. And because they were very powerful, we were living in. My brother was living in Richmond at the time with my aunt and uncle, and because this church was very powerful, Richmond, the seat of Virginia, government. And so we were able to get all the paperwork and straight away, and left Singapore in 2.5 months after we landed.
That's pretty fast. I want to go back to being on that boat, pulling back into Saigon. That must have been harrowing because you escape from Kanta and you drift for 3 days only
Mm,
to be returned back to Saigon. And
mm,
once you're in Saigon, you spend a few days. I mean, what did you actually do? Did they bring food back for you guys or?
yeah, yeah, there was always food provided to us for the past few days already,
But
at
you
sea.
must have been so nervous thinking that, wait a minute, you've left, now you're back into the port and you're
Well,
just
I mean,
waiting.
that was I wasn't thinking like that. Like I said, was very ill-defined, one step at a time in front of you. But the adults, of course, were very, very scared. And people like my father, who were in a re-education camp for a long time. Well, I mean, it was long then. Of course, my uncles who were there for 10 years, but but my father, those people were very, very scared. But we all, it went without. We were not supposed to be on the dock, so we were under the, that's a huge boat. We all have our own, we share beds and cabins and whatnot, but they were able to absorb us all. I can't even remember all the details of how the boat shaped and all that. I mean, I remember working on the deck, trying to help, the boats. And one of the tasks at the time was the only task that we, all of us could do was to scrape off all the rust on the boat,
Wow.
and so that they can repaint it or whatever. But we were just working, for the next few days, take the trip from Saigon back out. That's when we were allowed back onto the dock, the deck, to be, and it just sea everywhere. And I looked at sea everywhere for like a week by then, and it was just. I
When
mean, I remember drifting for was it 3 days, 3 nights, and And at the last time before we saw this boat, we thought that we had already gotten to Malaysia, and we saw a. I remember seeing an oil exploration platform, oil platform out in the middle of the sea, and I thought, we all thought, oh, we're in Malaysia. At least that's what the adults were telling us, and they were trying to go to that thing. And the closer we got, the we saw a lot of people on that platform, and kind of, at first we thought they were waving at us. I thought they were waving at us because it was right. I mean, you would say
Right.
people there were just waving at you. There's so many people on that platform waving at us. And then we realized as we got closer that the flag that they were flying was the Vietnamese um, communist, the Vietnam flag at the time. And the people on the platform were just shooing us away, saying, don't come here, go away. And they pointed to a direction of international waters, and they pointed that direction. And and the people who captained the boat saw there was another big boat, and they asked the people on the platform, and we were in shouting distance by now, and they said, go that way, go that way. Um, and so we went that way, and in doing so, because the boat had lost a lot of its, fuel, and there was no more food, and all of that on the boat by now. And so, we went back out to that big boat, and as we were approaching it, I think we were going against the waves at the time, and it was just, that was scary, because I thought that that boat was gonna break apart anytime. That was crazy. Um, and so, but by the time we got to that big boat, they pull us up, and yeah, so it was just weird. Like I said, so ill-defined. I've lost many of the details of that trip, but I remember the decision, or the captain talking to someone who spoke English on our boat, the family that arranged the boat trip, and that person, and the information that was relayed to us is that we were very lucky, because the day before they saw a different boat, but because they didn't get the approval from their government, from their company, to pick us up, they had to let that boat go, and we were the first boat that they picked up, and they picked up another one um, the day after us. And yeah.
What when okay, so many years later you returned back to Vietnam via, I'm sure, an airplane, right?
Hmm.
How
Hmm.
many years apart from the time
Oh,
that you
yes.
how
I
many?
actually, the first time I came back to Vietnam was 1990.
That's very early.
No,
What
it's very early. Yes.
what brought you back to Vietnam?
Well, my mother was still living in Vietnam at the time. My mother and sister and grandmother were still there, and so I went to work for a research institute in Singapore after graduation, and and just trying to find my way um, to back to see my mother.
What was it like in 1990?
Mm. Vietnam was very, very poor at that time. Very, very poor at that time.
And how did you get back in?
Oh, I was working in Singapore, and we got a visa, and I went to Vietnam.
You weren't Nobody asked about your lilit or, your
Well,
background
I
and
mean, no, people, I think, well, because I was also very young. So I went back at that time, and the only person that really got harassed was my mother. you know um Yeah, but my sister, who actually was working in the Hong Kong refugee camp at the time with the UN on her Fulbright, was also, she was also, she just visited my mother, um, I think a few months before I did, and so it was, we went back. My mother, never thought that she wanted to leave Vietnam, and for then that's why she stayed away until I left in 1980. She left in 1992 with, reunification. I mean, what is it called? It's a family reunification program. So my dad, of course, had filed paperwork, and for years my mother did not want to come.
What did you what did you study, and what was your education coming to Singapore? What brought you to Singapore?
Oh, the boat. Oh,
No,
oh,
no, no, I'm sorry. The second
the
time,
work.
yeah.
Yes, the second time. Well, number one, I wanted to go back to where where I was a refugee, a decade before that, and I wanted to be closer to Vietnam, and just in part is to work to see my mother, and that afforded me that. But
What kind of work were you doing?
we were just that research institute at the time. They were working on gaining a better understanding of Vietnam, and what's going on in Vietnam at the time. Because, of course, whatever that was going on in Vietnam at the time, the world did not know. So the Research Institute was funded by a German foundation. Um, yeah.
Can you
Uh,
explain to me what a nonprofit is?
a nonprofit in accordance to an American nonprofit, I want to say, because there are different kinds of nonprofits, different status in the world. The nonprofit here in America is defined to be an organization for the public service, and there are different types of 501c is a IRS code for nonprofits. Um, but 501c3 is the nonprofit for public good. 501c4 is something for social good, and Pivot, for example, is a 501c4, which means that it can do political thing, but the donation to private to Pivot or to 501c4 is not tax deductible, whereas the donation to 501c3 are deductible. And I believe it's 501c9, for example, are the status for the foundations, such as the Ford Foundation and whatnot.
How long have these structural setups been around in the United States?
Oh,
I mean, roughly.
I told you that maybe I want to research on it.
But I
But
mean,
I
what are we looking
don't
at?
really.
Like since the 20s, the 30s. And I asked this because I think it's sort of, if you think about it, it's a new model in the world of just the modern world, right? To create these structural entities to give back to society, right? Like we don't really have that kind of thinking in the 70s or 60s in Vietnam, or even I don't know if they're around today in Vietnam, but it's not something that has always been around for 300-400 years, right? This is a newish kind of way of thinking.
It's not new. It's not new at all. So I'm looking it up right now. So I was wrong at but the foundation. I know that they are from some 501c, and I'm looking at the list now. It goes from 501c1 to 501c29, and so there are all kinds of nonprofit membership organization like AAA and things like that. Um, you know, but I think that the status back was they dated back many years ago, 1913. is the origin of 501c4 organization date back to the Revenue Act of 1913, which created a group of tax-exempt organization dedicated to social welfare. And
Okay.
so everybody is, dedication to social welfare. So, you know, um, foundations. Um,
So I mean, in the history of mankind, it's a fairly new thing, right? 20th century.
yeah. So sorry, the private foundations are also 501c3, but they have a designated a different set of
Right,
a
rules and
different set of rules.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
How did you get involved with nonprofit work?
Um, well, I when was the first time that I worked for a nonprofit? I guess that foundation, for example, that would have been a nonprofit. Um, and so my first nonprofit work was in 1990. I came back to Vietnam, and then I stayed for a few months, and then I left, and in 19 I remember 1991 over the New Year. I took the first time. I took the train took me from Saigon to Hanoi. It took more than 48 hours at that time. It's half the
Wow.
time now. But so that was that, and I actually saw the New Year in Hanoi. Was quite exciting to see the New Year at the time, 1991. So 1991, 1990, and I went back to grad school at the time in 1991. So 1993, I left and I go to work in Vietnam. So and I was working with the World Bank at the time. So you can say that the World Bank is a mega, multinational. Um, it's a yeah, international organization, but it's also a nonprofit. So you can count that as the first nonprofit that I was
Got it.
working.
What did you go back to grad school for?
Economics. Yes, of course. It's like nobody was telling me anything else. Um, and I didn't know anything else. So I was just telling myself I got accepted to both law school and the economics program at Berkeley. But the only school that let me defer for 1 year when I was traveling in Southeast Asia was the economics and not the law school. So
So you ended up going to Berkeley for
yeah.
economics. What did you think that you were gonna do with your life after you graduated?
So this is why I know that young people must be very confused, because for someone like me, who don't have any role model in front of me, who were not connected to any role model at the time, um, you do what you think you able to do. I didn't think much. I thought, okay, I wanted to become an economist. I was in economics. I like economics, um, and I thought I was gonna do research in economics. But then I realized later on, as I was working with the World Bank and whatnot, that part of me is more of an action kind of person, even though I'm very keen on numbers and research and looking at data all the times. Um, I'm more proactive than that, and I wanted to do something. I wanted to be something, and back to what the dreams are and whatnot. When I was growing up and taking on the boat and all these things, one of the things for sure that I wanted to be doing was to build cities. I just think that it would be fascinating to build cities. And then I grow up to realize that okay, there are many ways to build cities. It's not just the buildings that go up, even though I'm very fascinated by it, but also the infrastructure. Um, and I was working with an environmental planning firm in LA prior to going to back to Vietnam the first time. I was working for that firm, and that they were engaged in building, or they were engaged in working on EIS, EIRs, environmental impact statement, for for instruction work, such as the solid waste treatment plan for Los Angeles, for example. And so, then you realize that building cities, especially like the Los Angeles city, for example, is a massive, massive undertaking, and it requires many, many parts. So yeah, so that so working on that gave me more of a sense of, more proactive, closer to building something rather than doing research. But so
How did you get into the work that you're currently doing?
I think so. I had worked in. So I used to say that my experience in America is an M2M deal, which is Morgan. It came from McDonald's to Morgan Stanley. So this run the gamut of it. And so I came back from working in Vietnam in 1993 to 1996. And then I came back and, work in Texas with my brother in finance for a year, and then came to um, the Bay Area in 1997. And I had got married by then, and we were going to build our life here in California. And at that time, it was a big boom in tech here in the Bay Area, and it still is, but it went through a very big dip in 2000. So when we came back here in 1997, I was working for a high tech company here, um, and yeah, so so that took me through 2000. And then I had my son, and then I left work to take care of him. And so when I wake up from all of this traveling, all this thing in 2003, and having to relook at my career, I decided that I wanted to do something in Vietnam with a nonprofit. So throughout that whole time, the second nonprofit after the World Bank that I was working for is an organization called CIRAC, um, based out of DC, um, that was run for many years by Bác Lê Xuân Khoa, and I was helping him with a project in Vietnam on microfinance for 14 different provinces. And that was quite a big challenge to run a program for 14 different provinces. I get to go to see many of those provinces. Um, yeah, so that was what was going on, and and so in 2003, when I was taking a look at what I can do, then I and by the way, so we in 2001 we co-founded together, a group of us sat down and decided to create Pacific Links Foundation. We thought that Pacific Links will help to bring anybody who's interested in Vietnam to support um, the development of Vietnam. And so that was, so by 2000, I already co-founded, 2001, we already co-founded an organization. 2003, we started relooking at what I can do in this space. And since 2005, I started to run Pacific Links full time.
So when you banded with a group of people to start Pacific Links, your mission statement was very general, it sounds like.
Well, it is, it remains very broad, and the reason it is remain very broad is, back to this whole idea that you were saying about being Vietnamese. We also thought that being from Vietnam gives us an enduring interest in Vietnam. And with that kind of enduring interest, we wanted to do something. And so many of us thought that we will by creating a nonprofit, we have a vehicle for like-minded people to invest in Vietnam, invest their time and their effort in Vietnam.
And Pacific Links is a nonprofit, right?
Correct.
Based out of the United States.
Based out of Milpitas, California. Yes.
And how has the mission statement, I wouldn't say changed, but how has it evolved since you
Well,
started it?
no, the mission statement has always been, to support the sustainable development of Vietnamese communities, because we believe that we want to look at Vietnamese communities, not just in Vietnam, but also in the US and elsewhere in the world. And so we believe that the Vietnam has had this diasporic experience that very few countries have had by that time. But now I think the whole world has incredible um, diasporic experience. So we worked primarily at that time on transfer of knowledge projects, and meaning that we were running IT boot camps. Many of the seasoned um, IT professionals here who are very dedicated to the development of IT in Vietnam at the time were on the board, and they have run these projects. And yeah, so it was so we Pacific Links originally had this transfer of knowledge project, which is the core thing that what we do. It was self-funded by the people who come to be the volunteers and doing the project and bringing the money. So in 2005, when I so okay, so step back a few years before that. So 2003, I accepted an assignment with East Miss West Foundation to to work on setting up a project for to for a donor, and the donor was a the donor is a person, a finance person um, from New York. And I think that his road to Damascus experience had made him realize that it was a chance meeting. He um, he went on a vacation trip that was supposed to happen in in China, on a bike trip that's supposed to happen in China. And I think that was the time where 2003 was when the um, H1N1 virus were raging about. And so the trip to China was canceled. It was moved to Vietnam.
Did he
And
fall off a bike? You said road to Damascus. I wanted to return back to
no,
that joke.
no, well, no, he didn't,
Was
but
he a white American person or a person of
well, he's
color?
a Jewish American. He and his wife were on the trip, and the two of them and others winded up in Vietnam. And they were in the middle of the field when they saw so many children around them. And then they said, "Oh, well, what happened? Why are you not in school?" And the tour guide at that time had said, "Oh, because they're too poor to go to school." And he and his wife said, "How many children? I mean, how much does it cost to go to school?" And it turned out that it costs, $30, $40 at least. That's whatever the number is. Of course, that the tour guide was saying to him. And and he's like, "Oh my God, we can easily put 1,000 children in school at that amount." And of course, it ended up costing a lot more money than that. But the donor is still involved. And so in any case, so that's the road to Damascus is his road to realize that he could do so much more with his money in Vietnam, by putting thousands of children to school.
How did
First,
you? How did you meet him again? I'm sorry.
No, this is he was reaching out to different organizations. So he
Stations.
came back from that trip, reaching out to different organizations, and decided to and one of those organizations was East Miss West Foundation, which was founded by Gileli Hayslip, and Gileli had not been with the organization for a long time since by that time. Nonetheless, East Miss West is foundation was founded um, after the book that she wrote you know um, when heaven and earth changed places, and so she founded that from that proceed and all that. The foundation was created by her, and so 2003, and so the organization reached out to me and asked if I would meet with the would work with them to recruit the funder and put a program in place. So I met with the funder in November 2003. I was back in Vietnam, and at that time, Pacific Links had already been created. So I was back in Vietnam, and it was really interesting. We went to a fact-finding mission, and the reason I was back in Vietnam at that time was because there was an MSNBC segment that about children, Vietnamese children, being sold for sex on the street in Cambodia, and there were a lot of outcry at the time about this whole thing, and over here in the U.S. And I thought, oh my God, how horrible that is. And I was asked by the group of people who helped co-founded Pacific Links to go take a look. And so I went in 2003 to take a look at that. And and when I did that, I mean, I also met up with the donor at the time. And then so the next year, 2004, by April, uh, I was working full time for East Miss West. That was my first job back after maternity and whatever, a few years taking off. And yeah,
Can I interrupt you? When when you said you were given the assignment, a fact finding assignment, to go check out what happened, and were you sent to Cambodia?
no, no, no. I went to Vietnam. I mean, basically, I was not given that as much as I took on that task. It was defined by me. So we took a look at it, and we realized, that the situation is worse than what's being seen at the time. So in 2003, mind you, at that time, human trafficking is not a very well known to the world as it is today. But even today, I would say that people don't know. Not everybody knows so much about it. But so I decided to do that fact finding mission, and then I also so in 2004. By the time that I was working for East Miss West, and we started building out
Okay, can I
the
ask you this?
stories of that.
When you do a fact finding mission for something that seemingly sounds so dangerous, can you walk me through the process of the fact finding mission? I mean, do you call a bunch of people that are on the street? Do you say, hey,
Mhm.
do you have a
No,
contact? How
what
does
I
that
did.
work?
Well, you have to backtrack and say, okay, so 1996, 1993, I was working with the World Bank in Vietnam. And then 1996, I was working for CIRAC with some assignments from the World Bank and as well as CIRAC, because I was an independent contractor then. And and so I knew um, poverty profiling. You know, I I've run the Living Standard Survey for thousands of households in Vietnam back then, and so I knew how this whole setup was. So the fact finding mission is basically going to different um, provinces in the Mekong Delta and asking the question of, okay, what what do you see here? How is the trafficking affected the children here?
What do you go
And
up to, like a village chief, a village
now, yeah, you go to the provincial government and you sit down and you request a meeting, and you sit down and you talk to them. And so I remember in a meeting, um, asking the question of, okay, so how many children in Vietnam, in your province, is affected, would have been affected by this, you know, human trafficking risk. And I remember at the time, this person sitting across from us, um, he said to me, he said, well, here's a document of what we have, and it's 10 people, 10 kids, and that's what they know. They know 10 kids. And I read through it quickly, and I realized the profile of the poverty, the kids in poverty, and not being in school and whatnot. So that's yeah, I'm like, oh my God, okay. So given this, how many kids? I know that you say that there's only 10 kids who have been identified through the court system in Cambodia and returned to Vietnam and whatnot. There's 10 cases. Um, but how many really, truly? Because if you're looking at this profile and you're looking at the risk and the demand for children being sold as slave and sexual slave like this, then given the profile of your province, how and I was in Đồng Tháp at the time, and there will be thousands of children affected. And and he looked at me, and I remember him folding, his notebook over and say, off the record, yes. And I almost slipped across the table. It was a big table. I almost slipped across the table and strangled him. And I mean, I remember the person sitting next to me, younger colleague. He had to hold me back. I almost stood up. So
I
he,
have like
he
1,000 questions right now in my head. Everywhere from how do they collect that kind of data, to who submits those names of the children, that
no, no,
all the
no.
way
No, no, there was nothing like that. Nobody submit anything.
there's no infrastructure.
No, there's no infrastructure for something like that. And there's still no infrastructure today. And for that matter, the people who actually were most at risk, and not just the people in Vietnam, but the people who resettled themselves illegally in Cambodia, and who are Vietnamese. So this whole thing about my experience as a human being, but going from one place to another, and having paperwork or not having paperwork, having passport and visa and all these things. Do you know how complex that world is? And then if you take a poor child, from a place, in the boondocks in Vietnam, be it in the mountainous northern region with the minority people, ethnic minority tribes, or in the Mekong Delta, in the boondocks in the Mekong Delta and elsewhere across this land in Vietnam and across many other countries. The It's mind-boggling how complex the world is to navigate. We came to the U.S. without, and I mean, by the time that we landed in the U.S., of course, it's all papered up, right? But we got out of Vietnam, we got to Singapore, and there was not a single piece of paper on us, right? I was not given a passport to leave Vietnam, and so I was stateless. And so these children are all stateless. There was no this whole difficulty, is tremendous, and it put at risk the poorest of the poor, the people who globalization comes to their door without uh, without preparation. And there are many parts of the world, and even in Vietnam, that's happening.
So 2006, you have this sort of fact find.
2004,
2004,
2004, 2003, 2000, yeah, 2003, 2004.
and
Um, and so yeah, so that fact finding trip was eye opening for me, and I said, we have to do something. And the key thing to do really is to prevent this from happening, because once it's happened, the young people or the victims are now part in the whole shadow network, if you will, right? Because they're not necessarily, criminals, because they are victims, but at the same time they live and breathe only in a criminal world. I mean, even if they were sold into a home, even if like a young lady, a young woman is sold into a family, um, she is still there illegally. So all of these paperwork that keeps the boundary of nations um, in hypothetical order, right? I mean, if you go on the plane and the plane carry an American flag, then you are on American soil, even though you're over the air and you're over the water of somebody else's water, or over, all of that complexity means that the vulnerability of the people who are the most vulnerable will be the people who are most
disenfranchised.
disenfranchised.
Yeah.
Yes. So this is true across the world, but I think many people don't, who had not gone through the whole experience of being a refugee or whatnot, and I hope to God that nobody have to do that, but unfortunately millions and millions of people are vulnerable to be exploited. And you can say that you have a job in the factory somewhere and you're being exploited, but but honestly, when you're on the road and when you are without paper, without protection of a country, um, you are very much at risk of being like terribly, terribly exploited. So that's the start of my understanding of what human trafficking, what human smuggling, what all of this forced labor, this modern slavery, modern day slavery world looks like.
2004, the doors break wide open for you. You begin to see the
Yes,
backside
the
of
world.
this dark.
Begin to see the vulnerability that I was
Yeah.
once exposed to, right? So people said to me, I remember in the beginning years, speaking to people from IOM. IOM is the international organization on migration, and they would say things to me like, "Oh, um, I can't believe why Vietnamese would have a heritage of selling their children." And I'm like, what? Right? Because the children who are sold at that time, many of them were sold by their family members, and
Not by their
somehow
mom and dad.
maybe sometimes by their mom or dad, but not. And I want to really clarify on that. But most of the time we have found in our experience been complicit by some um, members, some other family members. And I'll tell you the economic reasoning for me to think that it's not their parents is because what happened is that when the kid is sold into slavery, and that it's into slavery, the family, or whoever sell them, will receive some money. And if you have raised a child, you know that even in the cheapest part of Vietnam, getting $100 back for your child of 16 years old is not, it's not cutting it. right? I mean, that doesn't recoup the investment you've made, so to speak, if you're a parent. But if you are a relative who never paid any money into that, right? That's easier to
But
do,
do
right?
you think
Because
it's a
it's all the upsides on you.
yeah,
There's no.
but do you think it's a discussion that like an uncle would come over to his brother, an uncle like a brother would come to another brother and say, "Hey, I have a work opportunity for your daughter."
Mhm.
So it's more legit, it's more legitimized in the speech. It's
Oh, but it's never sold like that. It's not legitimized in the speech like that. It's downright trickery.
wow.
Because you know what happened is that, you know, a grandmother would say, oh, you're very poor, you know, so why don't you let some of the kids go to work? And you know, Vietnamese, you know, as a nation was developing, and this notion of kids going to work is not strange, a strange notion, especially to the poor, and also especially to people who are in farming communities, right? In farming traditions, because you know everybody helps out on a farm.
So
Uh,
your work today, there's it sounds like there's a lot of stages to this because there's a recovery of people who've probably been trafficked in the 10 years ago, 15 years. There's probably the recovery phase, there's probably the prevention phase, or probably the search and rescue phase. Where do you find yourself in the organization?
we
What
have
phase?
actually worked in many, in all of those aspects, in all those stages, because we assisted thousands of people by now. But I would say that our work our work primarily focuses on um, prevention, because as someone who's trained in economics, I really truly believe that human trafficking and forced labor um, is as anti-development as possible for a country like Vietnam. You know, when a young woman is ripped away from her family, from her community, it's not just the loss of the family, it's also the loss of the community. So if you think back this way, you know, you look at a national view, because of course I work at that kind of lens, vantage point. You invest in making sure that you know, child infant mortality rate is reduced. You invest in making sure that maternal
Mortality.
maternal mortality rate is reduced at the time of childbirth. You work to make sure that education is invested in at the youngest level, right? I mean, elementary school and before that. And you make all of those investments, you know, in healthcare for everyone, and all of that, the vaccination, healthcare, everything. It costs everyone so much money for, and this is beyond the family, right? For a child to grow up. And then when this child grows up to a certain point, um, someone will come and steal the child away from the community, from the family. That and if that's done en masse, right? If that's done at a big scale, then the whole community collapse. And so, you know, so you just don't, you know, it's not simply the fact that, oh, somebody sold somebody else, but you have to think about, okay, if this person goes to work, right, and send home the money, and if they're able to send home the money, then their family benefits, but the community also benefits. But if the person is sold, cut and dry, like many thousands and thousands of women in Vietnam been sold into China, into you know, um, a slavery situation in China as brides, really, that that is done for. The community doesn't get anything back. The family certainly doesn't get anything back. And so in terms of how you can see the transactional nature side of this whole thing rather than the human, emotion and connection side, you would see where the you know where people should put more money or resources to stop this from happening.
What are the stages of the cycle of being bought and finally recovering somebody from? Can you go through the
I'm
ABCs?
gonna give, I think it's best, those things to say in a story, a typical story, of someone who was sold as a bride into China, and mind you, we have a shelter at the border of Vietnam and China, and we've had the shelter um, since 2010. Uh, I just it's like so it's just decades go by seems like, and I've met hundreds of women, young women, who've gone through this experience, and some of the what they say to me, some of the things that stick to my mind. For example, one young woman said that, when she realized she was sold, she was tricked. Um, she knew the only thing that kept her alive, she thought about committing suicide, but the only thing that kept her alive was to think of, if she died here, she would die outside of Vietnam. And she does not want to die outside of Vietnam. And so back to this notion of being Vietnamese, and how that in those kinds of moments, that identity is what keeps people alive. And sometimes that same identity could keep people dead, but put people to death. But I would say that, that one woman, what she said stay with me. And so her story, for example, would be typical. They went to a market. They met up with some unscrupulous people who said to them, "Oh, let's go hang out. Um, let's go over." Um, so usually it's a young man who would say, "Oh, I'm very interested in you," and he would sit around and court this child, this young woman, for a week or a few days, 2 weeks, and and then and then she would say, "Okay, it sounds good. So let's." He's like, "Why don't you go um, to across the border to Dam Dỗ, right? Dam Dỗ at my sister's house." So and so she feels like, okay, I'm now included in the family kind of events. This is great, right? So as far as dating goes, this is great. And then on the day of that, he called her up and said, "Oh, so you already at the border, and you can take the boat and just go across." Um, on the day of the border, and on the day of that event, he said, "Oh, my mother just told me to buy some more stuff, so I will see you on the other side. So when you come over there, call my sister." And then she would go over, and thinking that she's just going to go to a market, and going to a party. You came over there, and she was nabbed, and then they put her into a harsh situation. And then one woman, well, many women had told me the story of, like, when by the time they got themselves into that situation, um, they they were given a choice. Some were not given a choice, but many were given a choice as well. And the choice is either they work in a brothel at the border, or they are sold as a wife to anywhere deep inside somewhere, China. And I remember another story, another image that came to me, and I received that image on my cell phone. So a brother of a young woman had contacted us and said that, to help locate her, because he had received word from her, and how are we going to rescue her. And we received that news. So I said to my staff who talked to the girl and said, please go and take a picture of any sign that you see, because she said it's all Chinese. How am I gonna go anything? Where am I? Right? Because in order for us to find her, number one, we have to know where she is. And and that particular story was crazy as well, because she the first thing that I got sent back, I wish I find it somewhere uh, in my record, but it's not. So she showed us this sign, and it said Beijing, literally in English, right? Beijing, 500 kilometers that way. I'm like, that is not going to be helpful.
Wow.
Oh my God, that's not going to be helpful. And so things like that, happen. So this one young woman that was talking about, who didn't want to die, she said that, the brothel owner, she was given a choice, and she thought to herself that if she stayed closer to the border, she could escape easier than if she was sold um, deep
Deeper
into
inland, yeah.
China, right? Because she didn't know anything. It was just amazing story for that these people had lived through. And then I remember another story where a young woman said that she called back to the broker and cried, and this is the only number that she has. She called back to the woman who sold her and said, please help rescue me. And what the woman told her was, okay, why don't you just stay still? Here's a deal. You are going to bear a child for that family. And once you bear a son for that family, then I will extract you. It'll be easier for me to go and extract you. And by this time, this woman usually had been raped so many times, it's like, give up or whatever. In this particular case, after she bore the child, she finally understood more Chinese that the family was speaking. And then she realized that the families were planning to sell her onward. They were literally planning to sell her to another family. And that's when she made the decision to leave her child behind and escape. And so I would say that over the years, of running this, I can, you think that you have many questions. I have 10,000 stories swirling in my head, and all the details of morphing into this whole, vulnerability that is just astounding. So we know that we need to really focus on investing in the young people in Vietnam as as our our primary and really only possible solution to get out from this situation.
Now,
Because we're talking about millions of people, 90 millions. Vietnam now is like 92 million people, right? And it will go to 100. Uh, and if you just say that, let's say 20 million of them are poor, we're still looking at 20 million people who are children who could be bought and sold. And that is really an unacceptable number by for the world, because like I said, these people, once they're bought and sold, they are now illegal. They go to the police, they may or may not be in jail, things like that across the world. Anyway.
now, when you have been doing this work in the early years, I mean, these things start to compound psychologically into anybody who's working in, you're a policeman, you're a paramedic. You start to get PTSD. You start to have this information in your mind. You're running through so many scenarios. Did you ever find that it was very overwhelming and at some point you had to seek treatment or outside help for your mental state?
So I think as a refugee, I need to seek outside help forever. But aside from that, the I remember in early in the time that we were working on this, I think um, after we established a shelter in the South, maybe 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, there was a young psychiatrist based here in UCSF who came to see me and said, I would like to spend time to work with your staff. And she went to Vietnam, and she was not able to do much because of all the red tape and whatever not. But she came back, and then she said, I need to see you. And I said, okay, but I'm on my way to Vietnam right now. And she and I ended up meeting in San Francisco airport um, at 11 p.m. And we talked until 12 p.m. when I have to go into, the airport inside for the plane. But what she said to me is this. She said, know this, you know, every I worry about the people who work, your team, and I worry about you. And she said that what they understand, the doctors, that what they understand is for every 5 stories of rape that you hear is equal to one time story that you raped yourself.
Wow.
And I kept that statistic. I mean, that was just like, it blew, it's just like, oh, what kind of risk am I running this program? What kind of risk? It's not about me, but it's about my team. So I immediately, after that, I put in place something like, only like, all the staff who are working in other parts of the project and not directly with the victims. If we're working on the scholarship program, working on all the other ones, we are not, no one is to ask the stories from these young people, from these survivors, unless they get clearance from me first. And the reason is, it's
Mm.
just to limit exposure, right? And
That's
make sure
that's a
that,
brilliant move, a brilliant policy that you have. I
yeah, but
mean,
and it was, I think, I mean, if somebody gave you that information and you knew that you're going to do work with hundreds of people, right? I mean, that's kind of scary. And um and so and to protect also the survivors, and we need to have some policy like that in place. So we put uh, parameters around that, and also, and we realize also in that process is that for the young women to retell that story over and over again is like experiencing it
yeah.
over and over again. And who wants that? I mean, in this country, we know this. But I remember, oh my god, one time, we were sitting around the table, me and all the survivors, and one of our staff member, Tao, at that time. And this is like 10 p.m., yeah, 9, 10 p.m. at night or something like that. This is certainly after dinner, and we're just sitting around chatting. I was coloring or doing something with one kid, and the other one was just talking. And one of them just suddenly said, and out of the blue like that, she was knitting or crocheting at the time, and she was like, well, they told me that if I talked to my father and told him what was happening to me, they will go to my house and get my sister. And I'm like, what? What? You, during the time that you were in Cambodia, you got to talk to your father? And she said, yeah, they gave me the phone, but they said that to me. And, they gave me the phone near that and said that to tell my father not to worry, and that I'm okay. Because what the traffickers worry about is that the family will go to the police and report the news, right? And then, it will
Unravel their operation.
unravel the operation or put the damage on the operation. So they coerce these young women into telling, calling home and say, I'm okay. I'm not going to make it back to that, but know that I'm fine. So the level of control that the traffickers and all these people have over these young women is crazy. I mean, it's absolute, and it's and therefore slavery in at
In
the
every
end.
sense of the word. Yeah.
Yes,
How do
and so
you, yeah.
yeah, I mean,
How,
no, I don't know how to deal with all the trauma. The question you ask is about how to deal with all the trauma. I think that one way, the only way to deal with all this trauma is to not to recount the trauma. Different young women have different ways. Some want to bring the perpetrators to justice. The, the whole lot of them just want to move on and hang on and build towards something new, and we focus everybody on building something new for themselves.
how do you get funding?
For the work with the trafficking victims, we get funding from people like you and me, so we get very little funding. um, Corporations don't touch this kind of, because it's too close to prostitution, it's too close to ugliness, it's too close to desperation. So it's hard to for a big company. um, you have to see the from the optics side of things, how things never get funded. Because so we get about a grant for a few years now. We get a grant of 15-20,000 dollars a year from the UN to help with the people, but they don't want to help the survivors longer than 6 months. All kinds of requirements all the time. But so we get, most of the time the funding comes from people like you and me. Um, if that doesn't come from the U.S. government, then it comes from, yeah, from us.
You brought
So
up
I don't have any money from the U.S. government in this um, in this effort at all. So we work as as much as we can.
you
But
brought up
like I said, we have a big portfolio. The biggest portfolio we have, really, in terms of funding, is in the prevention space, where we give scholarships, and we have close to 3,000, 2,500, 3,000 children in our scholarship programs throughout um, 9, 13, 14 provinces in Vietnam
you
right
brought
now.
up prostitution and big corporations. Why does big corporations shy away from this idea of prostitution? What that was like the first word you brought up, and it just
Well,
triggered.
I mean, I mean, if you look at the relationship we have in this country uh, about puritanical, if you will, view of how the world should be, and then all the things about um, I don't want to to collapse too many things onto each other, but in many ways, the optics of these young women being forced or not quite forced into the situation, and by that I mean, like that one young girl that we were talking about. If you ask her, why didn't you just rescue yourself and run away, she would say, well, but the trafficker told me that if not the trafficker, but the people who owned the brothel told me that they will go after my sister. So so she was there, she was going to work every day. So in the eyes of many people, she was a willing participant,
Participant.
even though in that particular case she was 15, and there was no participation on her part. But if you ask her, she's like, okay, I was here, I crossed the border on my own free will, right? I was not drugged and put in a van and drive across the border. I crossed the border because somebody told me the wrong thing, but I crossed the border on my own free will. And so the definition, it used to be that many law enforcement across the world, not just in Vietnam, they asked that question. And if the person said, yes, I crossed the border on my own free will, they'd say, oh, you're not a victim. So, I'm saying that people look at all of these stages that the experience had been in, and they would say, okay, it's unclear, right? And so corporation, when they invest and they do charity, want to have a clear cut story to tell. The optics of bordering anything is crazy, right? So if a young woman, like I said to you, was given a choice of either to be sold into the boondocks, right, or to be a brothel worker and sex worker, and she made the decision to be a working in a brothel, and you say that that was her own free will,
Right.
in what way is she able, it's just like oh, you can choose to be a slave or die.
Yeah.
I mean, is that really a choice?
Right.
um, and so and but in the mind of the people, even when you interview them, when you work with them, you talk to them, that was still a choice, because
Yeah.
they were given a choice, right? You label it as a choice when there was no choice. So with regards to how people can help, I mean, to be honest, the cost of housing someone for a whole year and having food on the table for them every day, you know I mean, it still boils down to uh, like several $1,000s a year.
Right.
Whereas if you give a scholarship program, you know, what we ask for is $350 a year, so that we can work with the young scholarship students, give them the money to pay for all their school fees, for their uniform, for all of these things, all the programming that we do with them. That's still a lot cheaper.
Correct.
And then on top of it, the potential of this young child to graduate from school and having a beautiful story to tell is so much more endearing and possible than the story of someone who's like, oh my god, I'm not sure if I can wake up tomorrow and face you know I remember making decisions like the policies to not have young women who have children in our shelter. And that was hard for me as a mother, but I basically said, okay, we cannot run a child, the shelter is very small, right? I mean, and we cannot run a
Daycare.
daycare at the same time. uh, and for that matter, there are many young women who, when they first come to the shelter and after being rescued, they can scream through the night for weeks. So if you have a young baby, 1, 2, 5-year-old child with you, how is it possible that will be congruent, a
Right.
good thing, to be exposed to people who could just be stark crazy at any moment? I mean, what if the stark crazy person look at the child and get triggered something, and the child is crying all through the night, and then these people, that's just way too much. Um, and so we help with them in those cases. We help with them at their family, giving money for milk for the children, and follow up with the mother. But we just basically said, when you're ready, and sort out the situation with uh, that child care with your parents, then you can come and study for a trade, learn something. We will pay for your vocational training program.
So right now, do you feel like there's a clear-cut path to your goal of, obviously you're never going to eradicate this problem, but is there more of a process to eradicate or lower the numbers of kids that are being trafficked?
And
Or
well, Well, you have to fight at all fronts, basically, right? I mean, fake news is one of the major, well, now I have a label, but misinformation is one of the major sources that send these kids on this perilous and vulnerable situation. And so you have to fight that too. And so we've had meetings with Facebook, and we look at what's posted on Facebook and all the fake news and whatnot, and it's really a crazy world out there. So you fight there too. You have programs. We run social media campaigns. We run ads. But we do all of this. So the ads, for example, we work with you know a ad placement company, media placement company in Vietnam who does pro bono work for us. So they locate hours, minutes on the internet for free for us, things like that. So we do what we can with the very little money, because who do you think will pay for that? When you think about um, an individual person, when they make a donation, um, want something concrete, and they know that a campaign, public service announcement kind of thing may cost $5,000, $10,000, whatever, the audience, and nobody wants to pay for that. And nobody wants to pay for there are people who say to me all the times, why does it cost $3,000 per person, to be in our shelter a year? And I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about food, right? if it's if it's
Yeah.
$100 a month for food, like $3 a day or $2, that's already
It all
cutting
adds
into
up.
1200,
Yeah.
right? In the house, even though it was built for free, we ended up fixing it, and free, meaning not good quality, whatever. We ended up having to spend close to like five, six, $700,000 a month to repair it and to keep it going. And then there's all kinds of other things around the house, and also the house mother. Those people need to get
Get
a
paid.
salary to go to
Hmm.
work as well. And and this is a 24 on 7. So how do you get to a situation of 24 on 7? You have to pay at least three people so that they can do a 24 on 7 job, right? And so you can tell right away that how that add up to the amount that it needs to add up on. And that doesn't even include the programming and the support and the staff who have to run around and locate, um, mm, you know internship, locate, and who does the fundraising? Only the people who come to the shelter will give the money, or the people who are away from it will give the money. So who get the money. So at the end of the day, the math for a nonprofit really doesn't add up at all to do these things. and
So
and
do
yeah.
you have fundraisers throughout the year, or do you throw galas, or?
we we don't know enough people, so we don't even throw gala. I think the last one we threw, I mean, people in Vietnam, sometimes we have donors who will set up an event for us, but by and large, it's not that at all. So the last fundraiser I think we did was in Orange County here in the U.S. I think we did one in Orange County. That was 2013, I want to say.
Wow.
I mean, you know, we have only three staff member here, and I was traveling, except for the COVID year, I was traveling the whole time. So we have two people here, and one is just to make sure that all the paperwork is done correctly, the receipts are tabulated, and whatever. So yeah.
What's the future for Pacific Links as an organization to do more work?
Well, we have a lot of good work that we have done in the space of scholarship, in the space of investing in the young people, and be it in school or in factory. We have created solutions to try to keep people safe, workforce development solutions, on transparency, working with brands, big names like Victoria's Secret, and L brands, limited, and things like that. Clark's, we know we're in touch with those groups, ANF, um, and they've been supporting our effort for years. But again, like I said, the corporation wants a story to be really nice, neat, and clean, and at scale, because they are not interested in
Right.
even funding something more than, I mean, they work with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of workers. So how much money per worker are they supposed to give out from their, from their net profit, from their revenue? So all of these things, at the end of the day, I'm very realistic about. But at the same time, I realize that we all fundamentally, I'm hoping, I'm still believing that we all want a world free of slavery. And
I I
at the
want
paper.
to ask you a personal question about your own finances, if you don't mind. Like, and here's what I mean by that. You're very educated. You worked in finance and econ, and you it sounded like you were living a great life before you got into this kind of work. How do you sort of support your own financial situation if you're doing this work? It sounds like it's almost pro bono at this level.
No, no, I mean, well, it used to be, and I have to donate money in to it. But no, I mean, my husband went to work in the high tech companies, and that helped me to, in the early years, to be able to do this work. Um, but I think that the hardest thing for me is not my situation, but recruiting people to go to work with me. And I remember this one person who's still with us now. I The first year she was working as a volunteer. As the first 2 years she was working as a volunteer, and then we paid her the third year. We paid her half time, and then the fourth year, I basically said, it's indecent. It really is indecent to 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 continue to pay her that low. And I want to say that recently, one of our staff member here, we only have three, um, had a child, and what we pay her qualify her. And she had a child at the local hospital, and the cost of it is whatever the cost is. Um, we pay her so low that the hospital, she qualified for the hospital to waive all fees.
Hmm.
And so, I am lucky that I've had some savings in the past years, right? And my family and my husband worked in high tech, but now, Pacific Links, I have to find money to pay me, and then also to pay other people
Right.
as well. So I think that personal finance, I'm okay. I'm not sure about retirement, because as a nonprofit, unlike governments, we don't have a pension. And then, everybody who comes in the door thinks that it must be very, very cheap to be a nonprofit, because we get everything for free. And very well that that's not true at all. But we have to be very resourceful and ask for help. I remember a meeting with a donor who said to me, um, "Well, you seem so uh, burdened and worry all the times about money. Why don't you find someone who's like a retiree, who's well-to-do, and who can run the organization? And I see, in another organization that I fund, it's headed by a Google engineer, and he doesn't take any salary at all. So there's no burden to have to create a salary for
Right.
yourself. And I'm like, I didn't say anything back nastily or anything. I did tell her that it is indecent to pay the young women who's sitting next to me nothing, in the fourth year. But I'm asking you, right, in the work that I just been trying to describe, maybe not very well, to you, so far now, you think somebody who's an engineer at Google will have time to do the work that needs to be done?
No,
And
no.
so at the end of the day, this whole notion of what nonprofit is, and how people come to me and say, oh my god, you're doing so great work, and I'm thankful for all of those encouragement. But i'm I'm an economist. I want to see, what's the opportunity cost for every single person walk through the door? What do we give to them? What do they get out of it? And really the longevity of how this whole nonprofit can be, can sustain itself. Everybody wants a sustainable result, but people want only to invest for 1 year, 2 years max. And I think the fallacy of that in the nonprofit sector is well known. The government gives money to nonprofit because the nonprofits have a much smaller uh, how this cost structure than the
Right.
governments do, right? That's the only way they outsource to the nonprofits to run all these programs. Nonprofits are supposed to collect more resources from wherever they can, but most of the time it's hand to mouth.
Right.
There's not no one, who gets rich running a nonprofit, and we all know that. And so in the world where we all say that we want to remove the vulnerability from all of the people, the young people, so that we all can grow and prosper, who's putting money towards that? And when was the last time you put money towards stopping slavery from happening in
I
our
mean,
life?
yeah, I mean, that's a great rhetorical question, but I can answer that. I didn't, before speaking to you, I never even thought about this stuff. These are things that the regular person in our communities are not thinking of. We're thinking of ourselves. We're happy to even have a job these days. I mean, I'm talking about being, in the pandemic these days, but these are things that we're not thinking about. We're not thinking about the plight of these
Well,
unfortunate.
yeah, I live in Silicon Valley, right? So and crisscrossing this, and every time I go out there, and I used to have like a 20-year-old Honda, and then park in the neighborhood, and it's always kind of people was like, oh, what the hell is that? But it was fine with me. It was still working until it didn't anymore. But and I looked at all the Tesla around here, $100,000 car, and I'm like, oh my God, that person has a Tesla, and I have Pacific Links, right?
Right.
And I remember years ago, when I met up with this one person because I was translating at my son's school for a newly arrived family, and this young woman. So her uncle, who'd been here for many years, met up with me, and in that meeting, he I had to translate because the school wanted me to come in and translate, but then she also brought her uncle, and her uncle is an engineer here in the Silicon Valley, And he asked me what kind of work I do, and I said, oh, I work for a nonprofit, a little bit of what we do. And then, he stood up from there and he said, well, you're very lucky that you have the money to do what you do. And I'm like, what do you mean I have the money? And he said, well, I have to go to work for a living. And I said, so do I. And I realized then there that it's really at the end of the day, you said that you just first learn more about slavery and what the whole world looks like. But at the end of the day, what do we value more? And I'm pretty darn sure that this, you know, this me would never end if you don't put an end to it. Meaning, I need this, I need this, I need more of this, and I need forever. My needs are forever out there. You can't sit on your high horse. You can't sit on your low horse. You just have to go along with all of this and understand that the world, and navigate this whole chasm, this whole like richness of Silicon Valley, and what's going on in other parts of the world, and going back and forth between those two worlds all the times, and trying to make sense of it is very difficult. And then that is itself, I think, trauma building, because you think about it. I mean, if people, instead of getting a Tesla, they can get a like electric car for a lot less. Can they donate the rest of the money to some cause, right? And then we have the billionaires who, of course, signed a pledge, and that's wonderful and whatnot. But every day of our lives, what is it that we pay towards getting ourselves a better society? What is it that we put down towards a better
Yes.
society?
What's the price? What's the cost that
What's
we
the
have
price?
to?
What's the cost? And where do you say that, okay, I still have my aunt to take care of, I still have my cousin to take care of, and all of that, right? So so in the end, it's this question of sustainability. It has got to be a question of, um, how do we define ourselves, not just as Vietnamese, as a global citizen, as a community member, as a family member, as loving yourself first. And what does that mean to love yourself? When you say that, okay, I'm not going to do this, I'm going to do this, and give this amount of money away, or go to work for a nonprofit and be paid less. Many business people, who come and donate to us, or who scrutinize what we do, um, I feel like they check their business hat off at the door when they ask us, well, mm, how many people do you have working here? Are you as efficient as you can be?
Hmm.
And that kind of thing, the nonprofit world, economically, I mean, structurally, it's very, very
Lean.
difficult.
Yeah.
It's lean, but it's worse than lean. I think it's hand to mouth, right? Um, what happens is that you have money from a funder to pay for something that somebody else consumes. And so forever there will be a fundamental, a big
Disconnect and.
disconnect.
Mhm.
And in that disconnect comes many kinds of warped conversation. And organizations, are asked all the times to articulate and bridge that gap and make it so nice and pretty for the donor side, and so wonderful and ample and generous for the recipient side. And I think that inherent in that is a huge exercise in communication, hard work, and everything else. But communication is not going to cover the hard work that we
Yeah.
have to work,
Yeah.
right?
Well, Yip, this is a lot to unpack, and I want to tell you how much I appreciate your time. It's been a very eye-opening session to sit here with you and go through all of these things. Can, this is a sector of humanity that can go on, maybe 10 times more than the time that we spent here dissecting it. And this is a very important part of our history, is now giving back, because we've sort of gotten to a place where we can in our community. But thank you so much for spending the time with me. I value it very much, and I value you. Thank you for all that you've done.
Well, thank you for listening to my rambling. I hope that some of those lines. I mean, we wanted this to be unstructured. Somehow that people get a glimpse as to what creates our world.